To be part of the Indian community in Britain, do you have to be ethnically Indian? If you answer yes, then it surely follows that to be part of the British community in Britain, you need to be ethnically British. Most people would be quite comfortable with the first proposition. Many would balk at the second. So, of course, it begs the question, what does it mean to be British or English? Well, first, we need to distinguish between being British on the one hand and being English, Scottish, Irish, or Welsh on the other. I think David Starkey says it quite well when he says, British is a wrapper we put on ourselves for foreigners, but when we interact with each other, we're always English, Scottish, Welsh, or Irish, and I think that's a perfectly good summary. Suella Braverman famously said she considers herself to be British, but not English. This is a rare display of self-awareness from a politician. I don't take the ethno-nationalist position because I think it's something of a blind alley. It's possible to be British, but not ethnically from one of the 4 home countries. But there are certain criteria you have to meet. Simply having a passport doesn't do it. Being born in a country, for example, is a useful but not sufficient qualifier in my view. Many 3rd or 4th generation Asians born in northern towns still consider themselves to be of the home country rather than British. You can see this in Norman Tebbit's famous cricket test. For those too young to remember, he said, a large proportion of Britain's Asian population failed to pass the cricket test. Which side do they cheer for? It's an interesting test. Are you still harking back to where you came from, or are you more concerned about where you are now? This statement suggested that immigrants and their descendants who supported cricket teams from their countries of origin, rather than the England team, were not fully integrated into British society. And this drew huge flack at the time, but it doesn't strike me as being terribly contentious. The test was a measure of perceived loyalty and assimilation, implying that true British identity required an unequivocal shift of allegiance from one's ancestral homeland to the United Kingdom. This is surely true, isn't it? Tebbit later defended his stance, arguing that if a community was looking back at where it had come from instead of looking forward, then there's going to be a problem sooner or later. The comments generated significant media attention and ongoing debate about national identity and multiculturalism in Britain. Fraser Nelson recently came up with an argument based on place of birth, which was virtually the opposite of Tebbit, where he rather ludicrously claimed, if 2 Europeans had a child in Tokyo, the child would be Japanese. So if being born in a country isn't sufficient, what else is there? Well, having significant ancestral heritage certainly helps. If you have at least one parent or grandparent who's British, you have ethnic ties to the country. And certainly assimilating into the host culture is massively helpful. This doesn't mean you have to entirely abandon your native culture. I know quite a few Indian lads who are perfectly nice fellows. Pretty much the only behavioural indicator difference is the fact they plague me with Diwali sweets annually. Ultimately, though, it comes down to loyalty. This includes loyalty to the country over others, and you can see this in everything from sporting events to geopolitical disputes, as well as loyalty and adherence to the home culture. If you celebrate Christmas, for example, you're buying into the Christian heritage of the country, at least to some degree. And lastly, you need to be assimilated into the dominant culture. If you marry into the tribe, then over generations your offspring become fully assimilated. This is the way to achieve successful immigration. For this to occur, immigration has to be relatively small scale. In-group preference is a logical and entirely predictable human behaviour. People will tend to favour people like themselves, except for white liberal women who've got some kind of pathological out-group preference. And scale is important here. If the immigrant group is relatively small and it can't form a large group, the youngsters tend to marry into the wider community. This is perhaps the key point, and we used to understand this. You simply cannot have rival sectarian groups living side by side but never interacting. There will be cultural animus at the very least, and you start to lose Western institutions like trial by jury and democratic voting on the basis of political positions rather than ethnicity. You only need to look at the somewhat ludicrous re-election of Mohammed Lutfur Rahman. He, of course, is the Bangladeshi mayor of Tower Hamlets who was re-elected after disqualification and a 5-year ban. He was found guilty of illegal practices, including bribery and making false statements against his rival, but that didn't stop his re-election. It's not necessary for us to all trace our ancestry back to Alfred the Great. We don't all have to look the same, but we do need a common set of values and beliefs. Otherwise, we will simply give way to sectarianism and ultimately end up in some very dark places indeed. We can see a microcosm of this in some of the failed northern towns. We need to stop it before it goes countrywide, and the Britain many of us love goes quietly into the night. Our values are important. We have to defend them.